On behalf of the Department of Environment, I just want to say we really appreciate your interest and all of the support that you've given us so far throughout this journey with SCTLD, as we refer to it. It's a long mouthful, stony coral tissue loss disease. This afternoon, we're hoping to have a very informal session. Our goal is to brief you on what we know about the disease so far, its progression in Cayman, to tell you what we've been doing since we spoke with you last. And I am just going to introduce Dr. Croy McCoy now, who's going to give you an overview of the disease and what's happening, the situation in Cayman. And then Project Officer Tammy Warrender will give you a more specific presentation with some more details about what's happening with the disease in our reefs here. So, Croy, without any further ado, please come and provide your input. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Ms. Jana. Again, I would like to say heartfelt thanks for taking your time out of your day to actually attend this meeting.
We're having a little problem with the audio that is trying to be resolved. So there's a little bit of echo and we can't quite hear clearly in the back.
Okay. Speak slower then. Moreover, I would like to thank the Watersports industry for their patience and compliance with what we asked last time we met, and help when needed as we all confront and tackle this threat to our coral reefs and to our way of living here in Grand Cayman. Back when we met in October last year, we discussed a few things. I'll go over those. Trying to go forward here. We spoke about where it came from, and as you all are aware, it started by now, aware that it started out of Port of Miami, more so, and I think it's called Virginia Key, for you guys familiar with that area, where it spread north and then went south. It was largely ignored for a long time because it was thought it was something that was specific just to the port dredging. We also went over what it looked like on our reefs and how it compared to coral bleaching, along with other diseases that we've been having on our reef for the last few decades, and how to try and differentiate between those. We also talk about the pathogen was, as we thought, it was bacterial, in a sense that antibiotic treatments were being successful in treating it on the reef, and how it was transmitted by touch and by water currents as it moves around. And we also went over how the DoE was planning to respond to this threat on our reefs, and also how we go about diving with disinfecting our gear, along with which dive sites we should avoid as to not be a vector in spreading the disease. Sorry. Trying to. Here's back. Anyways. Today we're going to give you an update of what have been going on ever since then with our plan. Where is stony coral tissue loss disease now in Grand Cayman? We call it locally or regionally as SCTLD for short, because it's a mouthful to pronounce. And how will it affect our reefs as we see it? And what is the Department of Environment's ongoing response? We'll also discuss something a lot of you have been asking, was can we dive on the north side? Along with galvanizing how we disinfect our dive gear, again, to not be a vector in this whole realm of spreading the disease, along with how we disinfect our boat bilges if we are on the north of the island or going into our island. and how can you also help us? With that, I'll turn it over to the lead coordinator of the Stony Coral Tissue Loss Disease Project, Mrs. Tammy Warrender. She will give you a presentation on all of our efforts so far, along with laying everything out and how we go about things moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Croy, for that introduction. Let me just sort this mic out. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Is that good? Okay. So yeah, it's my pleasure to talk to you today about our updates from the Stony Coral Tissue Loss Disease Project. It's been an ongoing process, and we're very thankful for the way that you have adhered to the regulations or the suggestions that we put out so far. It's a big task, but the first thing I would like to talk to you about today is where's SCTLD now, both in the region and in the Cayman Islands. So regionally, as Croy said, it began in Florida in 2014, and from 2018, it had appeared in Mexico, Jamaica, and St. Martin. So it had already been well established in the Caribbean basin by that time. By 2019, it spread further. You can see that by the yellow names of the areas. And then by 2020, it appeared in Cayman, as well as further down the eastern chain. And now, as of 2021, I believe it's in Honduras as well. So it has spread far and wide, and on our reefs on the north coast, it has spread a long distance from just outside the reef and the Run Point area towards Spanish Bay or Conch Point, as you might know the area being called. One of the main reasons for this meeting is just to discuss how it has been traveling and how now it is past the fire break that we tried to make on the North Reef. So as a brief recall of what we did on our fire break, we tried to remove all of the highly susceptible species, or the 3 most highly susceptible species from that area of reef. The idea being, if they weren't present, would it then continue to spread to the other vulnerable species in that area? So it's been very interesting to watch. When we first looked at the disease and how it was traveling, it seemed to be at a speed at 1 mile a month, and that was back in June, July, August time. September, it managed to jump a long way. Whether that was because it started in another location, we're still investigating, just outside Stingray City Channel. It seems to be like a new epicenter there that started. But it does seem to have slowed down. It started progressing at approximately 0.5 miles a month, so half a mile a month. And that could have been due to our efforts of coral thinning in that area. So as well as establishing the fire break, we also worked intensively in this area to remove the diseased coral. So that was 2 different aspects we were working on: the removal of diseased corals, coral thinning. So we believe that those were the reasons that it was progressing slower on the reef. Another possible alternative is because of the time of the year. It's colder months, so that could have been having a different effect on the corals and how the disease moves. But we do know that from January, that was right up at the border and it had not passed our fire break, and we would have expected it to. But it did pass it by February, and it's moving again at 1 mile a month. So we do believe that our fire break worked, and we're considering doing another fire break closer to 7 Mile Marine Park. So following from that, I think it's very important to talk about what this means for our reefs and what happens once a reef is established on a coral tissue disease and how it passes through the reef. And it's quite an alarming threat. It affects 25 plus species of hard coral. So these are our primary reef building species, the species that cause us to have the structure out there in the first place, and they maintain that structure so that we have protection around our islands and homes for our coral reef species. And the mortality rates, I suggest, from Florida are 60 to 100% of those species. So once a coral becomes infected, the tissue loss is rapid, and it leads to colony death within weeks to months, which is completely different for any other disease that we have on our reef here. The transmission rates are very high. It spreads very quickly between corals, and it spreads very quickly along the reef. It also jumps geographical locations from islands to islands, from Florida all the way down to here, and there could be a number of reasons for that. It could have been just purely from the currents. The way that it travels was against the prevailing currents coming down from Florida, which suggests that boats could have a reason for transporting it to the Caribbean in the first place. But we're still speculating because we don't know what the pathogen is and exactly how it is transmitting. And once it's on the reef, it can also jump from coral to coral, and it can jump from touch. Possibilities of dive gear, so if you're in an area that's contaminated and then you dive in an area that's not contaminated, you could be spreading it. Or if, not that you would, but if you touched a coral that was diseased and then you went and touched a coral that wasn't diseased, you can transfer it that way. And there's other reasons like fish transmission. We've seen the disease being eaten by fish and by invertebrates, so they could be feeding on a disease lesion and then feeding on a healthy coral and transmitting it that way. These are all questions that researchers in the region are working towards, including us. We're trying to find the answers to those questions. So it's also active year-round. It still manages to persist through the different seasons. The water temperature may have an effect, and some of the data that we have might be able to answer that question as well. But we do know that it's constant. It's been constantly progressing in Florida for 7 years. And it's, I think, the only region that's not been diseased is the dry tortugas. But it could have been diseased in the last couple of months for what I know just now. And it's present for multiple years. It's been 7 years it's progressing in Florida. So I wanted to share some of the results from our studies on the north coast of Grand Cayman. And we tagged 170 corals at 2 sites immediately following found the disease. So Penny's Arch is where the disease was first found, and Max's Garden is our control site. So this is an example of a Coprophilia natans, a boulder brain coral, and it took 4 months for this boulder brain coral to die. So once a coral is infected, the colony dies within weeks to months. But you can see this is progressing from when we tagged it on the 8th of July, and it died on the 30th of November. This is an example of a different species. It's the elliptical star coral, Dicohenia stokesii, and this colony took 2 weeks to die. It was much smaller, and it was a different species. So the progression rates vary depending on species and size. And we can get a lot of more information from this study. It's still in progress, and the disease is still moving through the reef on those sites. This is our results, which are not very happy. So at Max's Garden, That's our control site. So when we first mixed to Max's garden in July, there was not any diseased coral at that site. And we tagged about 8 corals of all the different species. And these are some of our results from this experiment. So it's called a control because it's completely random. There has been some instances where corals have survived, whether that's down to their genetic tissue or whether it's down to their flora and their bacterial layer, we're not sure. But by tagging random corals, you can get an example of what the reef can look like at a wider scale. So that's sad to say for these 6 corals on the screen, because we seen 100% death rate or infection rate of these corals. So this is an example where we can lose a high amount, up to 100% of these corals from the reef, if we can't do anything about stony coral tissueless leaves. Interestingly, this is one of our highly susceptible species, elliptical star coral, and it was 75%. But I want to stress that this is still an ongoing study. The disease hasn't moved completely through the reef yet, so this might increase in the coming months. And for the rest of the species, it was between 20 to 60%. So yeah, we have some examples of corals that aren't infected by disease, like your branching corals and your Parietes species, but this is a large amount of corals that will get infected. Oh, I left this slide in, I thought I took out. Here you go. So lettuce coral was 25%, and boulder star coral 71%. So it's still a very high amount, and we're still seeing the disease pass through. But we plan to do the same study further along the reef and see how it's infected in different areas in the Caribbean and the Cayman Islands. So what is the DoE's updated response? What are we going to do now that we have some of these results? So the good news is, I'm sure you'll be happy to know, some good news, is we do have a dedicated response team. So not every island in the Caribbean has what we have in the Cayman Islands. We have already set up a response team within the department, and having the department in place for such a long time has put the Cayman Islands in a very good position for dealing with this disease. We have historical protection. We're coming up to 35 years of protection and management from our marine parks. Not many places in the Caribbean can say that either. Some of our reefs are the most pristine in the Caribbean. And marine parks just enhance the chance of corals' ability to withstand impacts from these factors, such as disease and bleaching. So we're already a step ahead from that sense. Cabinet is considering an increase in the management and protection of coral reefs and marine habitats from 15 to 45%. We're hoping that that's sometime soon. And again, it's just a local response that we can really value from our government in the Cayman Islands. We have little pollution and runoff. We don't have much farming on islands, and we don't have many rivers, so the nutrient loading on our coral reefs is minimal. We have a system of collaborators from international and regional areas, and we're working with them to try and find out what this disease is and how we can stop it, find a cure possibly. So we've taken over 150 samples from the highly susceptible species, the 3 highly susceptible species so far, and we plan to do a lot more within the next few months. And this will go towards epidemiological research, which will try to find out essentially what the pathogen is and go towards new possible treatments so that we have best options of practice for dealing with this disease. And for our research and mitigation response, we are going to continue to monitor the spread of stony coral tissue loss disease. We're considering that second fire break on the northwest point, and we're also considering doing one on the east side. It takes a long time, so we have to decide what needs the most priority of all the different response efforts that we have to choose from. We will continue treatments on the north coast and inside the sound. These are mainly antibiotics so far, and we plan to select and protect priority reefs. So in the event that the disease continues to affect every reef in the Cayman Islands, so far it's just in Grand Cayman and not on the sister islands, but we're going to look ahead and choose reefs that we can target to focus our mitigation efforts on. So this is a very large task, and we're coming up with ways that we can do this efficiently and effectively over the coming months. We are going to continue to train volunteers on disease identification and how to use the treatment options that we are using. And we really want to expand our citizen science reporting effort. I'm astounded by the amount of responses that I seem to be getting every week these days. It's been great to have, because the department focuses all our efforts on this specific area, mainly to focus on removing the disease and combating it with the various treatments. It's difficult to be anywhere else around the island, so the reports that we get from everyone about strange-looking corals on our reefs are beyond valuable, and I really appreciate everyone that's helped out with that so far. But we would like to increase it in the coming months as the disease continues to move over the reef. And we will continue to mitigate until alternative treatments become available, hopefully soon. So amoxicillin and base 2Z, base 2B is the most effective treatment option that we have available. And we have experienced 100% success rate treating lesions on 80 highly susceptible corals. So it's really nice to see. It's really nice to see that a treatment option works, because the only other alternatives available at the moment are removing corals or removing structure. So antibiotics are the way that we will be focusing on going into the future until all alternatives options becomes available. However, when you do antibiotic treatments, it's quite an intensive process, and it doesn't mean that the healthy tissue won't become reinfected. However, the reinfection rate has been low so far on our study that we've set up in the North Sound. So the hot topic, can we dive on the north side? We do want you guys to dive on the north side. We've never not wanted you guys to dive on the north side from a sense of, we understand it's your business and your livelihood, and some of you guys focus heavily on diving that area. But having that area that we suggested to be closed was very valuable from trying to assess if our fire break worked or not, and trying to control that area for where we were doing the removal and the different studies. But now, as the disease progresses along our reef, we're establishing more of a how can we live with the disease approach rather than can we actually stop this disease moving. And so as long as the procedures and protocols are followed, it is okay to dive on the north side. But we recommend that all diving and snorkeling should be done in the same geographical area. So if you're doing a dive on the north side, on the deep side, and then on a shallow side, you can sort of stay within a few hundred meters of that area and still do a 2-tank dive. but we would still like you to avoid our monitoring and control sites, which just now is Penny's Arch and Max's Garden, but we might have to update that soon, depending if we do another control effort to see what corals are dying in specific areas. And we are focusing heavily on dive gear disinfecting and bilge water disinfecting, which I'll go on to talk about a little bit more. It would also be, so we are going to update the map that we do every now and again. Hopefully every month we'll have that new perimeter of the disease spread, and within a couple of miles of that area, it would be great if you guys could avoid that area completely, because we do know that it passes from possibly a different variety of ways, but we want to make sure that we can reduce the ways that we can reduce. We can't shoot all the damselfish because they're biting on the coral, but we can stop people diving, or we can ask people to avoid diving in an infected area and a non-infected area. So that area which has the line of the western extent and the eastern extent, which will be updated soon, is that area that you want to avoid if we want to do that, as well as doing a dive on the north and then doing a dive on the west, or doing a dive in the north and then doing a dive on the east, and decontaminating all your gear before moving to any other area in Grand Cayman. I also want to stress that this disease can show up at any time on any reef, and we do get different reports every week, and it does take us a little bit of time to go out and assess whether those reports are stony coral tissue loss disease or not. So we are going to, I'll talk about disinfecting gear next, but we think it's a good idea if everywhere in the Cayman Islands we disinfect their gear, whether we're on the east, the west, or the north side, just because the disease can be there already. So disinfecting dive gear. We're recommending the same protocols that NOAA from Florida and the Florida Marine Sanctuary. They recommend that we use a 1% bleach solution. So that's approximately half a cup of bleach for every 2 gallons of fresh water. And you have to soak your gear for 10 minutes. And we will send out these protocols after the meeting to everyone, just so you can have a read in your own time. It's also important to make sure that this solution accesses your BCD. So the BCD is an area that can stay quite wet for a long period of time, so we want to make sure that some of the disinfectant goes into the bladder and moves around, and then you can clean it out with water, so that when you go into another dive site, possibly on the west side, when you're going down, you're not releasing any of that pathogen into the water. We do know that if you just wash your gear in fresh water, that it won't get rid of viruses and pathogens. So even though we don't know exactly what it is, we think it might be bacterial because of the success with antibiotics, but this is obviously just the best practice we have for getting rid of viruses or bacteria. It's the same sort of standard that I believe you guys actually have to follow for COVID. I have some of those regulations in my bag, but it would be great if we can do 2 birds with one stone, especially when people start to come back to the island, to make sure that it would be suitable for COVID and for stony coral tissue loss disease. And letting your gear dry is also a good way to make sure that it's not on your dive gear. So they don't think that it would still be there if your gear was completely dried out in the sun. So yeah, we would like you guys to do this 100% before going to the sister islands. We don't think that it's there yet. We have had a couple reports of a sea gnat colony on the south side, but none of the highly susceptible species have been infected yet. So we don't think that there's any stony coral tissue loss disease in the sister islands. We would like you to decontaminate your gear after diving in the North Wall, after snorkeling in the North Sound, and essentially after diving on any dive site in the Cayman Islands, if you could disinfect your dive gear. So how do I disinfect my bilge water? I have a video that's really great that can show you how to do it properly. I can play that at the end of the presentation. But the best option that we've found for disinfecting your bilge is sodium percarbonate, and it's essentially sodium carbonate plus hydrogen peroxide. And this degrades better, and it could also access the biofilms that might accumulate in your bilge better than just your classic sodium carbonate can. And again, we would like this to be done before traveling to the sister islands, and if moving from the north side to the west side or the east side. So if you were coming out the North Sound, you can disinfect your gear using the proper regulations before heading to Little Cayman, or before heading to the west side or to the east side. So I'll play that at the end. And then finally, how can you help us? If you see something, please say something. Even if you think it's an area that we already know about, or it's obviously more essential for the west side and the east side and the south side. We don't think it's there yet. So if you say something, it's better than not saying anything. And if you have pictures, it's amazing for us, because then we can look at what you're looking at, and then we can say, oh, it's just coral bleaching, or it's black band disease. And these are just examples of two of the most highly susceptible species, which we want you to look out for the most. Generally, if you find brain corals on the reef that are infected with SCTLD, you'll find these species close by heavily diseased or dead. We're questioning whether we're not sure how it behaves on our deep reefs, and we would like to continue seeing photos of all disease, but it's accepted around the Caribbean region that these are the first species to go, and then the brain corals go soon after, and then it's your orbicellas and other species. We have an app. So I've received multiple reports over this last month on a variety of different ways. So via email and via Coral Watch on Facebook, which has been very successful. But it would be really great if we could start using this app, and perhaps everybody in this room could download it today. And it's pretty straightforward. It just gives you prompts when you access the app of your name, your date, where you've been diving, what have you been seeing, and it asks you if you would like to upload any photos. So it's just a really good way to have all of the responses from you guys in the same area. And then we can plan our days accordingly and go out knowing the geographical location straight away. And we're accepting volunteers with the DoE. We have a variety of different people that have helped us over the last few months. And I know a few of you have reached out recently. And I have an inbox full of people after the last Compass article of people that want to sign up. So it's great to see. We do some training before we go out on the reefs. There's sort of two different ways you can help that I think we'll try and set up in the near future. Is you can come out and see the disease, because firsthand I can show you all of the different pictures possible, but when you see it for yourself, you can see how bad it is, and it's very good from an identification point of view. But we are also a small team, and we would value having people that would like to dedicate 1 or 2 days a week to the effort itself. And for that, you'll receive specific training that we've made, and yeah, you can get involved with the whole process. So thank you for listening. I know that's a lot to digest. I'll just play that video really quick, see if it's easy. I don't know how to get out of the presentation. I'm not sure what I did. That's 1 cup of powder for every 5 gallons of water to be put in your bilge for at least 10 minutes, soaking it. We want to make sure that we then put that water not on the reef. We want that to go far offshore. Courtesy of the Perry Institute. Okay. So that's one thing. We haven't managed to source it just yet, but it's something that we plan to do soon. We would like to find a way that we can buy it in bulk, but as soon as we find it, we'll be able to distribute it to you guys, or let you know where it can be sourced.
Of your disinfecting gear with bleach in your filled water, or you want to avoid that?
I think as long as you go far offshore, yeah. The alternative that we have been using is ammonium-based disinfectant. That's what we've been using at the department. But we don't really want to contribute any more nitrogen to the water that's already contributed. So I think from decontaminating gear and avoiding spillage and things, bleach would be a better environmental product than nitrogen. But then sodium percarbonate is better than bleach. So once we get our hands on that, I think it would be, yeah. And I think you can use sodium percarbonate as an alternative bleach option for your gear too. But with COVID, everybody's caught on to it, so the prices have skyrocketed, and it's also hard to source now. So hopefully we could find a good way to source it soon.
How big is the team that's working on the project?
On the field, 5 department staff who also have a lot of other work to do. We have a lot of other projects, and COVID's shut down a lot of those projects last year, but this year we have to meet our targets like we do every year. And our volunteer response, I've done training for approximately 30 individuals so far. And with the outcry of people volunteering this last week, I think we'll hold a couple, probably 4 different sessions in the next 2 or 3 weeks to train new individuals. And better changes, people's availability change with work and things, but I would say we have about 10 dedicated individuals that help us with the project every week on different days.
So would you say manpower is a restriction on your ability to cope with the disease?
Yeah, it's our main restriction. I think the more manpower we have and the bigger response we have, the more we can do. Because you can see from that presentation, like all the different aspects of the project. There's checking out where the disease is, moving currently, has it somewhere else. Then there's checking the reports elsewhere on the island. There's doing the antibiotic treatment, there's doing it in the sound, or doing it on the reefs, or doing it somewhere else, hopefully not. So it's having a bigger team to cope with the loading of all those aspects is what we hope to get in the future.
Okay, would you say funding is the main limitation to you actually having enough people?
Funding for staff, we are considering having, it's been proposed that we want to have a bigger team and have the funding available to hire people so that people aren't just volunteering their time, and then we can have trained individuals that are out every week. And we should find out about that proposal very soon.
Okay, and is this a type of project that we're able to access the environmental fund that we have?
The Environmental Protection Fund, yeah. So that's
an obvious choice.
Yeah, so that's where most of the funding has come from so far for dealing with this project, the equipment that we've had to buy and all different things.
Who puts a limitation onto how much of that funding we can actually use for this project?
I'll take it. The Environmental Protection Fund, the money that we have and we've been able to spend and that we hope to spend is money that we budgeted 2 years ago.
Okay.
So we're running on a 2-year budget, which ends at the end of 2021.
Okay.
So what we have done is we've basically taken any money that we didn't spend in our other projects that we got approved, because we don't control the environmental fund, contrary to popular belief. That money is voted by the Legislative Assembly of Parliament now, every year during the budget session. So we applied for some money for various projects, and we basically pooled it and made a proposal to use the money that we were awarded for other projects, essentially, towards this project. But we have to get permission. There's, many hoops we have to jump through because we're spending public money, essentially, which is fair enough. But the other point about the Environmental Protection Fund is that its source of revenue is primarily tourism driven. We all pay it as well when we travel, but nobody's been traveling, and we haven't had any visitors. So replenishing that fund last year and so far this year, there hasn't been any money going into the fund.
Okay.
So it is a bit of an issue for us in terms of.
So how much have we actually had out of the fund to go towards this project of protecting our reefs?
This, oh, you need me on the mic. Sorry. We don't have, I don't have in my head a total, but we had about 100,000 that we had pooled together to, from various other projects to put towards this. And what we're asking in our proposal is to have that money available to us to use on this SCTLD project, because it had been allocated to other projects. So we can't just pick the money up and say we're going to use it on this project. We have to get the permissions that we need. And we're very close, I hope, to getting that worked out.
I was just asking because obviously we spent probably about 5 or
Mm-hmm.
And we've now spent 100,000 on what potentially has the major concern to the Cayman. It's probably the biggest issue that's affected the Cayman Islands and the underwater community, and we've spent 150,000. So,
Well, we've spent way more than that if you count DOE's resources.
what I mean, but as I say,
Yeah.
as a percentage of the expenditure on environmental projects is still very small, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely, and we don't control the environmental fund. I just really need to stress that. We have to apply for the fund every year to get money to put on our various projects. So we've managed to take the money that we had, 50,000 here or 50,000 there, and pool it, and forego other important projects in order to address this one.
Just wondering if we're lucky and the borders do reopen in May, June. I know Northwall diving season is usually late May through September. And if the dive companies get going, I'm just saying that's a huge resource that if you had properly trained staff and they all had antibiotic cream, and maybe some way to mark the coral heads treated, that, you know, as we're out diving, we can just hopefully
Yeah.
mitigate disease while we're there.
Yeah.
I really enable people with boats, staff that are doing nothing. We could we could be there in days, you know, and help, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We appreciate that very much, and we realize that you're very motivated to help
Well,
us.
actually, we're being paid to do nothing at the moment, whereas we could actually be paid to do something.
Yes.
Yeah, and the cost would not be a lot, you know, everybody's, you know, a lot of the staff are getting their
Yeah.
money and things like that, so, yeah.
Yes.
But if the limitations is staffing and numbers of people doing it, we can do it, you know, we just need to be provided with, the ability to do it.
Yes.
So it's like everything, it comes down to money, right? And the only way to get money to be able to deal with this, to get the resources to be able to deal with this, is to put the pressure on our MLAs, or whatever they're called now.
MPs.
Whatever they are, on our MPs. And obviously, right now is a good time to do that, because we've got a few weeks to put some serious pressure on these guys. And they're the only people that can pull the money out. And I know, obviously, you said that, as we know, obviously there's been no tourism, so there's been no addition into the environmental fund. But, I mean, it's my understanding that there are many millions of dollars in that fund already, right?
No. The money, as far as we can find out, and looking through the budget documents, there was some money allocated to other projects, like the integrated solid waste management work, for example. So I don't actually have a good handle on exactly what's available in the EPF, but it certainly isn't the amount of money that we started off with, because there's been reallocations.
But either way, I mean, as we were saying, there's, you know, to get people out there, it's a question of, you know, obviously we're not in a position to be able, either at the moment, to be able to finance this ourselves. But all it is that it's a bit of, we've got time, so it's a bit of fuel and it's fuel and it's air. You know.
Yes.
Time's not an issue. So it's for a relatively small amount of money, we could get some serious numbers of people.
Troy?
Do we have an optimal response plan budget? And also, given what we know now, especially coming out of Florida, what would we likely expect over the next 5 to 10 years? I mean, are we trying to push water up a hill, or can we get in there and mitigate this?
Yeah. So Croy is going to answer that. Come and use the mic.
Well, since 2014, more so in 2017, that they've actually taken the whole thing serious, because it was multiple failures from a federal level right down to the NGOs ignoring this. That was a huge problem. I mean, they've spent millions of dollars with mitigation efforts, and they've also started prioritizing corals, having refuge with aquariums as a genetic stock, and using, those that can't do that, the larger ones with antibiotic treatment. So there's many ongoing efforts mitigating against this. I mean, it might be called pushing water uphill or whatever you want to place it as. But the consequences of doing nothing is far more reaching economically. You know, the worst thing you can do is inaction, and it's going to be costlier in the end. But they've done many efforts and ongoing as we develop new ways, new methods, and application and stuff. It is, you know, all led by science, which we ourselves are doing.
And I think it's fair to say that it is a bit of a moving target, Troy, that, you know, if we could even find out what the pathogen was, that would make it a lot easier to plan and a lot easier to figure out, well, exactly what is the appropriate intervention. At the moment, we're trying coral thinning, we're having some success with the antibiotic treatment with the paste.
How expensive is that?
The antibiotic is fairly cheap, but the paste is more expensive. So it's a pharmaceutical company in the US called Ocean Alchemists who have created the paste, and it's specific to treatments of corals. So it makes sure that the antibiotics isn't leaked out to the environment, and it makes sure that it's put into the coral. So it's very different to work with. It looks a bit like Vaseline, but it's much thicker and stickier, and it's the perfect applicator for the antibiotic.
But the cost.
You have the.
It sounds like
It
if
was-
Cayman had a project to apply antibiotics to every coral that has been identified, and as they are identified, that's probably the most effective, without the cost aside, that would be the most effective, arsenal that we know in terms of
Yeah.
response.
Yeah, it's the only response that is proven successful, and it's regionally, the success rate differs, but the trials that we've done here have been almost 100% effective.
Okay, so having a project to say we're going to apply antibiotics to every identified coral in Grand Cayman, that's a tangible thing that.
Except I think it would be a case of not necessarily every coral. We would probably have to prioritize corals. We would want to make sure we're protecting our reef-building corals and some of the more rare.
Yeah, sorry, every disease coral.
Right,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
even every disease coral, we may not physically be able to do that. I mean, when you get out there, you appreciate the scale of the problem. And it may be that we end up having to prioritize. So those are some of the things we're thinking through now. If we have to attack an area of reef and get antibiotic treatment on it, which are the corals are we going to apply first, the antibiotic treatment to first? Which ones are we going to say, we're going to have to write that one off, either because of its size or because it's very common, and we can, in our judgment, we need to focus on the ones that are key for the ecology of the reef itself.
But it
Yeah.
sounds like we need a national response plan that mobilizes not only the professionals on the island,
Yeah.
but also amateur divers or whatever.
And that's what we're leading up to, essentially. It's we are also spending an awful lot of time in collaborative working groups. In the UK has set up a group for all of the overseas territories in the Caribbean to work on this, and our team here sits in on those meetings, and they're putting together sort of a plan for the overseas territories, and then we participate in the NOAA groups. So it does take time. That also takes time, which is why we appreciate your help so much. But we think it's important because in the region, I think it's fair to say that we're probably the farthest advanced in trying to combat this, actually have some kind of intervention. So people are learning from us as well. So it's important that the data that we're collecting, we're structuring our experiments and collecting data that's useful, not just for us, but across the region as well. So
Well, I would imagine that
it's
if
trying
we
to
stop,
balance.
Progression,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that the diseased or dead recover, right? So
No.
there is a real sense of urgency about stopping this from a commercial standpoint as well.
Absolutely.
If you lose a reef,
Yeah.
you don't kind of get that reef back next year. So,
No. far from it.
So that's where our training as well comes in. So we have trained 30 individuals on coral disease identification and coral identification as well. So that's the first step. So we also led the project at Eden Rock when the barge came in and stirred up all the sand. And that was a monumental project, but everybody was able to come, all hands on deck, waft the sand away. Wafting sand is something that I can teach you guys in an hour or less from my little briefing that I did at the beginning of those days. But putting antibiotics onto coral is something a little bit more difficult. So it would take like a step process and training on coral disease identification, like general coral identification as well. We don't want antibiotics to be placed on bleached corals or corals that are getting eaten by snails or corals with other disease. So it's like, unless you know how the disease moves and what it looks like and like what it is, it's sometimes pretty hard to do the right coral, for example. But I believe with training, it is possible, perhaps sometime in the future, that we can train people how to use those techniques and any new techniques that become available to us. It's just time. So that's the thing, the bigger the capacity we have, the more people that can do the treatments, the more time that we can spend making training sessions, organizing big groups, training people on these different areas and move forward with the disease treatments. So it's all a balancing act, like Ms. Gina said. Is the priority to have Croy and I and the rest of our DoE team out in the field mitigating the disease? Is it training the capacity that we need to then have people out? It's hard when the disease is moving so fast. So we're trying to cover all bases right now, and we're getting there. Our team is growing every day, and we're getting responses from people that need to help every day. It's just setting up is a little bit challenging. But we are moving forward with it.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that, you know, we are part of leading the science on this whole, this disease, you know, the DoE, and we've probably taken more studies, epidemiology studies, to try and wrap our heads around what it is, what's going on, so that we can develop stuff that will help us deal with this whole situation, not only in Cayman, but on a regional basis that we're all dealing with. So, you know, we have our hands in everything, like all hands on deck, trying to not necessarily stop, but mitigate right now until we find out exactly what it is and how to deal with it. And then we have a good grip on how to move forward further. And the company that is doing the base 2B serum infused with amoxicillin, they're coming out, I think now, rather before we had to mix it, which takes a lot of time, and you know, someone with some knowledge of how to do it, the ratios and stuff, they're going to make a paste that you can actually buy and in a larger tube that makes it more efficient to put on the reef until something better comes along. And that something better that comes along is going to be based on a lot of the work that we are trying to do. We're trying to figure out this disease in itself. Hopefully we'll do that over the next couple of months, that, you know, we can be in a better position a year from now, rather than a lot of countries that have been dealing with it for multiple years and their reefs are a mess. And because that's going to have a far-reaching, as we all know, impact on the economy of that country. Because in a lot of Caribbean islands, that's their lifeline of money. Sorry, go ahead.
So this has been around for 8 years now. What's the reef like now after this disease has moved through an area? What's left? How does the reef survive? What's it look like?
As Tammy showed you some of the results earlier and some pictures of what it looks like, I guess you can say those that do survive are still there, but the majority are dead and overgrown with algae.
It's like fish life dropped in the area?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
It has the
Nothing else has moved in to take place of the dead
algae.
Always algae.
It's the first occupiers.
So in Cayman, there is not a reef there yet that has had the disease move on from it. Even at our epicenter, it's still progressing over the reef there. But from Florida, I believe some of their reefs are down to 1 or 2% coral cover. It's very sad. But yeah, so
It's a trickle-down effect. As you know, a dead reef doesn't really support much.
Like the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
one of the main studies in coral reefs is analyzing like accretion rates versus the deterioration rates of a reef. So the amount of live coral that you have that builds up that cemented structure, that limestone skeletons on the reef to have that habitat for reef creatures and protection, it lays down the foundation continuously. So if you lose a high percentage of that coral, it loses the ability to keep remodeling the reef, I guess you can say, or replating the reef.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
So when you don't have that, it's kind of like a tipping point. You get the deterioration of the reef from things like ocean acidification and warming and changes in climate and all that. It increases, so we lose more of the reef through even just bioeroders that burrow into the coral and break it up naturally. So that increases, and then the accretion rate, the ability to layer up and establish the foundation, decreases. So we're probably now already here in general with corals, and then with the lack of coral cover, it's going to be more like that. So eventually the reef would get flatter and flatter, essentially, if you look further into the future.
I mean, it's carbonate production rates, but... Sorry,
Just
Matt.
wondering, like with Florida and stuff, so let's say 90% of the brain corals died off, but there was still 10% that seem to have been resistant to it. Are there any efforts, do you know, to start, spawn or creating little coral spawning or nurseries of those to transplant those since they seem to have been more resistant? Have they done anything like that yet? Or?
They're one of the main reasons why we have that probiotic. I haven't mentioned that in this lecture today, but the probiotic treatment that they have had some success with in Florida is taking those species that seem to have resilience against the disease, taking healthy bacteria that they think is a reason for having that resilience against the disease, culturing it, and then being able to put it into a liquid so that they can go down on the reef, put a bag over a coral, inject the liquid with this bacteria, this healthy bacteria that's already present on the reef, leave the bag there for 2 hours, and it can stop the disease progression. It's a probiotic. It's the same as if you drank one of those healthy yogurts to stimulate your gut bacteria. It's promoting bacteria that's already there to give you more resilience against other infections, for example. Yeah. So that is a treatment option that might become available soon, but it just depends. There's a lot of different stages that treatment has to go through, especially if they want to send it around the Caribbean. Just because it's a bacteria on their reef doesn't mean it's a bacteria on our reef, so they don't want to release new bacteria into the Cayman Islands, for example. And they're still waiting to get the approximate success rates of their studies on the reef in comparison to in a laboratory. It's always different, and with COVID it's been hard for them to get the results, and we haven't had an update on that soon. So it's something that we could be moving towards in the future if it does become available.
Has anybody approached Mr. Dart to see if there's any funding for any projects?
We haven't got there yet.
No, not yet.
What's the maximum depth that this disease can spawn?
It's not restricted by depth. We've had, Jo was out there like just last week, and she said that she could stay at way below 30 meters, maybe 40.
Yeah, I think I saw
It's
some around 80 feet. Though.
80 foot. Yeah, so it goes deep, and we've seen it as shallow as 3 meters, like 10 foot within the sound. It's unfortunately not restricted by depth, but it might move slower, like on the deep reefs in comparison to the shallow reefs. These are all different questions that we're trying to figure out in the limited time that we have, and so it's all of these answers are important and can change regionally, so we have to look at what the rest of the region are doing. Some countries have been affected for a lot longer than we have, so we can actually learn a lot from them as well as contribute back to them and teach them what we've been learning. And I do want to voice what Ms. Gina said as well in Croy, that our level of response has actually been pretty monumental in hindsight, and the ability for us to be able to respond to this threat has been pretty great if you compare it regionally. Some people don't have a Department of Environment, and some people don't have the proper connection with the government to actually set up a thing like a response like this in the first place. So moving forward, we will have like an outlined action plan, but it's a dynamic plan. I want to stress that it's hard to have a document with A, B, C, and D because it changes literally every week, and our priorities for how we respond change every week. But capacity, when we increase that, will become like it will help us.
It'll continue like that until we figure out what it is, actually.
So what do you need from us, other than cleaning our villages and sanitizing our air? What do we need? This sounds to me like this almost needs an international response. You know, can we tap into environmental funds, international environmental funds? Can we tap into our funding? Do you need political assistance? What do you need to give that optimal response to Cayman?
So we have part of our collaboration with JNCC in the UK is we have applied for Darwin funding as part of that group. I don't know that it's going to pour a huge amount of resources into Cayman, but what it will do is maybe take some of the pressure off of us in some of these other areas that we're talking about, so we can focus on the mitigation part of it.
I mean, we have boats and we have people.
Yes.
Right, which is probably logistically one of the greatest challenges.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's work together. I mean, this, as a Watersports operator, this almost feels to me like this is a greater threat to the future of my business than COVID is. Because COVID, we thought was going to be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Now we're, but there's still some kind of, we think it's going to become manageable. I mean, everything I've heard here today, it makes me actually think we have an unmanageable threat to our future.
It's really early days to go there. I think that we need to understand a lot more about what makes some corals more resistant to the disease. Are we going to be in better shape because we have had protected areas for much longer and we've managed other threats? I think all of those pieces are an important part of this whole picture, and we just need to do, I think from our perspective, we are looking at this as doing everything we can to learn about it and to understand what's happening, but also to actually make meaningful interventions on the reefs. And we're just not ready to say, this is a really gloom and doom scenario, but it definitely is serious. And in terms of threats to our coral reefs, it's up there. I mean, it's got to be the most important thing we're dealing with, which is why we're here talking to you and trying to work as hard as we can to figure this out.
But as a word of caution too, dealing with anything in the ocean is difficult, as you know. So that's why it's ever evolving, different aspects of it from a science point of view to mitigate and deal with it, or slow the progression until we can come up with methods that works, that help us deal with this.
I think it would be good, just as another thing moving forward, with if there are people who are available and have the different logistical support like boats and dive gear and tanks and things, which you all do, I believe, even though some of your boats might not be in the water just now. It would be good if you could reach out and let us know. So, and what amount of time you would have to help us with this kind of project. And that's one of the main reasons for this meeting is, can you help us in other ways other than just making sure we don't spread it in a way that's out with our control. So yeah, if you are willing to help, get in touch. You all have my email address. And let us know what your manpower is and how much resources that you have available just now while we figure out funding aspects. And it will be a process for the learning and the teaching aspects to teach about corals and things. And we obviously will have to have internal meetings to discuss having different teams being able to do different responses, for example, but letting us know if you're available is a step in the right direction, and then we can establish some kind of training that fits our response plan and going forward.
Let's say in a perfect world, you had all the money and resources you needed. Okay? This isn't a political question, this is just a hypothetical situation. If we were able to get you the manpower, if you were able to train that manpower, if we were able to get you all the amoxicillin and base 2B you needed, is that a potentially effective offensive approach to this problem? Because it's been proven over the last 6 months that defensive is not working. And the more time we spend waiting, every month, more than a mile of reef is being affected by this. So whilst we sit around saying, oh, we just need more time, the problem becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. When we end up with an exponentially bigger problem on our hands, financially and resource-wise. So if we're able to find a way to give you what you need, is this a solution?
I think it's challenging to view this as being proactive because we are responding. We're not treating, for example, corals that aren't diseased. So you need to know where the disease is going to, which corals they're going to infect. You can't really mitigate the disease by, it's not like you can vaccinate a coral against the disease. So it is a response. We are on the back foot by virtue of the way the disease is progressing and the nature of it. But yeah, the capacity issue for us is definitely something that we've said to you as a problem. We need to get more people, and we need trained people, and we need to have the resources to be able to give those people to make meaningful interventions. So money and capacity in terms of human capacity is definitely, they are two of our main constraints.
So we've got the people here,
Mm-hmm.
and we're, as an industry, we have quite caring and affluent customer bases who care about this island and care about the environment they dive in.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't beyond the scope of our capabilities. We have to reach out to these quite wealthy industrialists to try and obtain help, from organizations such as PADI, who have been doing quite well, of companies and organizations such as ourselves. It is not beyond that. So if we're able to provide you the manpower to train and help find you the financial resources, can we help you combat this? If that's not possible, what's the point of us sitting here?
Yeah, I think you can help us. I think hopefully that's been clear. But we need to be able to target the help appropriately. And that means that we need to have amoxicillin, we need to have all of the other pieces to fit into this. So we're trying to get that part nailed down. What we need to hear from you is, are you available? Do you have boats? how much of your time are you willing to give us? Do you need compensation for your time and your boats, etc.? You know, what is it going to cost us, not necessarily the DOE, but the government at large, for you to become involved in this? Because that's a big piece of it too. We need to understand what your constraints are to helping us. Because I'm quite sure that if we got into detailed conversations with each of you, there would be nuances and there would be conditions on your ability to help us. So to the greatest extent that you can help us understand what your constraints are, then we're then much better off to make a plan once we know what your constraints are. So I guess that's what Tammy was trying to say, but maybe not in such a direct way. We need to understand from you, you know, if you offer us a boat, are we paying for your boat captain, your fuel? You know, what exactly are you going to need from us in order to, because with COVID, we understand that there are some significant constraints on your part. So we need to understand what your constraints are as well.
Gina, I architected the Stingray feeding program, and we came at that by saying, what do we need to do? And then we architected it, and then we went to the community and said, obviously the people that architected it were in the industry. So we said, okay, a fair amount of money is X amount. There's no profit in there, but it's giving the guys that are going out there $12, $13 an hour. It's giving the boat, you know, $30 for fuel, etc. Right? We have 51 operators that are working in this program every day of the week. So how I would come at it is you architect the optimal response and tell us what you need, because one company may say, hey, for $200 a day, yeah, I'll do a boat with 2 guys. Another guy might say, I can't do that. But the point is that we need to have what is the optimal response, and then you come to us and say, this is what we're trying to do. And, you know, we may or may not be able to respond, but I suspect that one way or the other, we'll figure it out as to how we can respond. You know, I don't scuba dive, but I've got boats that are capable of taking divers. So in one case, I might be able to take someone from DoE and 3 people that are being trained on my boat. So
Yeah.
That's how, come at it from what do you want the response to be. We said we've got to feed the rays 7 days a week. We've got to feed them, you know, 60 pounds of squid a day, because and then we broke that down, and then we went out, and we thought we were going to get maybe 10 or 15 people, and we got 51. So I think in the same way, what do you want the response to be?
And that's what we're doing. We're basically looking at, you know, how many teams could we realistically and practically manage on the response. And we are actively working on that. So we're hoping to be able to come out very soon to you as a group. This isn't going to be the last time we speak with you by any stretch. We probably will be back in a week or two to say, okay, we have this much money, hopefully, fingers crossed. This is what we would like to do. Now what can you do to help us?
Put it out to tender. Just put it out to tender. Give it guidelines, what you want. Say, tender for it, like we do with all other government contracts. And we put a tender in, basically. If we want the job, we put a low tender in. If we don't want it, put a high tender in. And then you can sift through all the options and see what there is. But
There are some challenges with tendering this, but
It's going to be a much larger project, isn't it? And it's going to be ongoing.
Yeah.
So we need to get a mechanism that, you know, shallow reefs, deep reefs, you know. But it sounds to me like the urgency is quite significant.
yes, yes.
Gina, I fully agree with Troy, but keeping in mind last June and July, everybody wanted to help out with art and all these nonprofits and give it to them. By late July, August, we were all going back to work. You got the bodies here right now, let's get them going. And I agree with putting it out to tender, however, because in 4, 5, 6 months, these bodies may not be available.
Yes.
So I think it's gonna carry on longer, meaning the whole thing, it's gonna be a slow progress back to normal, so.
Okay, we thank you very much for your your input to us, and we definitely will consider all that you've said as we move forward. So just let you know, we will be in touch, and we promise that we will keep you updated in terms of how this is going, and also what we need from you. Anything else? Any other questions? Anything from the rest of the team? Anything we need to say?
No, just pedaling back just a little bit. We got on this 3 days after it was discovered here in June, and we were talking about funding. The main thing is we need to do the science, or we are going to win this war, so to speak. So that is another major aspect that requires a lot of money that we don't really think about.
Just a quick question on the training aspect of it. How much time do you need? Do you need like full days, or you need a few hours here, a few hours there?
So I already have the first training session established, and that's on coral disease and coral identification, and that takes about 2 hours. Some people in this room have already done that, and then I guess it will be, if we do that going forward, we would do how to do the treatments in the water, which would require both land-based training and water training. So I would say maybe 3 days in the field and 3 lectures that take about 2 hours, as well as questions. So that would just be the minimal. And then even some of the people that have been out on the reefs with us and are helping with our project could voice in. It takes a long time to be able to identify a coral correctly, and I'm not sure how many people are trained in that in this room, but it does take a long time. I've been doing it for 7 years, and sometimes I'm still like, what is this, and is this stony coral tissue loss disease? So it's an expert field. You know, it's just like if you wanted to learn about the brain, it just takes a very long time. But it is quite, I think we can train to a point where people can identify a lesion that's very distinctive, if we can have people in the water and show them. And that's what we've been doing at a small scale recently, is just every DoE member is paired with a volunteer, and then they see for themselves what the DoE employee is doing, and they're getting taught on the job. And then they themselves can do the technique, and then they can train other people. So that's the method that we've been using so far with people that have answered our pleas for help in the past and reached out to us directly as from training. And then if you had time in the past 6 months, you were welcome to come out with us to learn more about the disease and what we were doing and our mitigation efforts. And everything that we've done is a step-by-step process. So even with the antibiotics, for example, that's something we've only decided to use very recently because some of the effects on the reef are not known. We don't know that if we put antibiotics on a coral, it could change its reproduction capabilities, and but then is changing the reproductive capabilities worse than not doing anything for the coral? It's all these big questions that make it hard to make decisions, but we do know what the result is if we don't do anything. So the antibiotics is something we've decided to test, and we're only, the results that I gave you from the 80 corals that we've put antibiotics on and the lesions, it's still very in its infancy. It's only been since, I think the first time we used antibiotics was in December. So that's still a minimal amount of time to test the success rate, for example. And other countries in the Caribbean have only received 30% success rates in different species. And Florida says 90% success, but it's with a very small sample size as well. So it's all these questions, we need to make sure we have the science well understood before we do it on a huge scale. So because we are starting to use antibiotics and we have results from 3 of the highest susceptibility species, we've now expanded and done different treatments in different areas within the North Sound on different species like brain corals. And we don't have the results yet of how successful that's going to be. But it is the best option that we have available until alternative treatments become available. So that's just sort of like a process of what we've been going through to try and set up ourselves so we can expand our task force as well as training people along the way.
So you have the different stages. So if you find a coral head that's, it's all dead now, could it still be infectious? Or once the coral head is dead, is it no longer a threat of passing on?
So when there's no live tissue on the
So
colony?
once all the
Once it's
tissue's
all dead.
gone, is there still, since it's bacteria, could there still
There
be?
could be. They're not sure. Like, they know that it's in the water column because how else is it transferring? Could be fish, but it did get there somehow, and it had to be, we think, through the water column or from a boat releasing the pathogen from ballast water or something. So it's in the water column. It could be on a dead coral that's covered in algae. It could be inside the algae. It could be inside fish. It's really hard to answer all those questions when you don't know what the pathogen is. So yeah, all the work that we're doing with the sampling, which takes a very long time. Cry and I have spent hours underwater for the past few weeks getting those 250 samples, and that's just 3 of the 25 species that I don't think we're going to, I think it's 10 species that we're going to sample from. But that's the other thing, all of our resources are going there as well. So is it more important to find out what the pathogen is, or is it more important to do the base 2B and amoxicillin, or the training, which also takes a long time? So it's just a steady process of expanding as well as answering all those questions.
I mean, largely there's not a lot known about this disease so far. That's why we're making a very big push in the science, from science perspective, to wrap our heads around it, that we can develop, again, methods to deal with it going forward.
This goes back to the 80s. I remember reading, I think it was in the 80s when we had the blight that killed off a lot of the urchins, which caused a lot of algae. But also at that point, there was a huge coral die-off. What back then, was it bleaching? Was it, what
White
then?
band disease.
White
they
band.
Yeah.
White band.
So the mortality rates of our elkhorn corals, if anyone dove here in the 70s or the 60s and 70s, like elkhorn and branching corals used to be the most dominant coral in our reefs. So I was not alive during that time, so unfortunately I didn't get to see it. But today you go out on the reefs and you still enjoy the reefs, and even though we don't have 90 to 98% or whatever it is of our elkhorn and staghorn corals. So it's hard when if you dove during that time, you're like, wow, these reefs are probably not very good in comparison to what I've seen in our childhood. And this disease is similar, but 25 species, not just 2. So, and from our results from Florida and from our results on the North Coast with 100% death of some of those key reef building corals, it's a lot of loss, and it's probably the most significant loss that we'll experience, or that we have experienced so far in the time that humans have been in the world anyway.
Just so we can clear expectations when you all leave here, what they're looking for is not just bodies, the human resources, they're also looking for a minimum level of qualifications and experience that Tammy at another time will share. But so just because we have bodies in the water, don't make them very, very effective. So there are minimum levels of involvement for volunteering with the program.
Getting back to talking about the Palmata reefs, I was one of those little kids that grew up with them, so I know what they look like. So they're largest carbonate production on the reefs of these islands. And I have a lot of old photos from professors that used to dive here in the 70s that they shared with me that, oh, it's amazing how the reef used to look like. But the death of them was really between the disease and hurricanes, really, especially in Jamaica, more hurricanes also.
And alcohol.
Yeah.
And coral bleaching,
And bleaching is
multitude of stressors.
a combination of factors.
Yeah. Okay, guys, any other questions, comments, any input? It's not the last opportunity. You can email us if you think about something that you wish you'd said to us. Please do email us and let us know. And we will be back to you asking for your support in a more targeted way, hopefully soon, very soon. Okay.
Thank you all.